When I first got to the European Parliament back in 1999, one of the things that really surprised me was the scale of what they call industrial fishing. And this was a fleet, predominantly a Danish fleet, not solely, but predominantly Danish fleet, going into the North Sea and catching sand eels, hundreds of thousands of tons of sand eels every single year. And those sand eels being ground up, used as fertiliser, used to feed salmon farms. And, you take the sand eels out of the sea, and it's very, very bad news for breeding seabirds, for all sorts of other fish species. I always thought the whole thing was crackers. Now, using what post-Brexit fishing powers we have, we've decided to stop sand eel fishing in British waters. But the European Union doesn't like it. It says we're breaking the terms of our agreement, we're discriminating against European Union boats, and that's really heading for one hell of a row. I rarely agree with much the British government has done on fishing, but on this, I actually do believe they're right. Well, let's get a view from Richard Kilpatrick, campaign manager of the European movement in the United Kingdom. Now, we're dealing here, I guess, Richard, with a number of things. We're dealing with the Brexit deal, the ongoing relationship with Europe, and the environmental aspects of this. How do you see this standoff?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, Nigel. I mean, I think I see this from two different angles, I guess. There is the point of divergence, which you've already made, which is the difference in rules and how that's going to evolve over the next couple of years. But then there's also the need to be compliant with the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. And on the specific issue of eel fishing, and ultimately it's the impact on dredging and the environmental impact, the EU have already passed legislation that aims to phase out the practice by 2030. And it would be great, actually, on this particular issue if the EU could meet our standards in this country. But I think it would also be great if the UK were a leading voice in the way of compliance on dredging as an active member of the European community. There is clearly dispute. And obviously the UK are saying that this is in line with the TCA, that it's not a problem. But this is why we have these mechanisms. And ultimately, if the EU decide to enact one of the mechanisms to allow for an independent review of the dispute, it is totally within their remit to do that. And it isn't if the UK has broken the agreement, regardless of why, it doesn't really help in the rebuilding of that trust in the relationship with our neighbours that we really need, especially 2 years out from the review of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement.
Yeah, but equally, we can't just give in on everything, can we?
No, absolutely not. But ultimately, this is about having a good, positive relationship with our neighbours. And, we have to look at the impact that Brexit has had on the fishing industry as a whole. We were once promised that Brexit would be this golden all-fix-all solution to things like quotas and the impact on our fishing industry. And, nothing has really got better for fishermen. And I think that it's coming back to us, the European movement, when we speak to the industry, that Brexit, despite all of the promises, has delivered nothing for the industry.
I have to say, I rather agree with the spirit of what you've just said, because we should have taken back our territorial waters. We didn't do so. The minimum would have been that 12 miles would have been for us to exclusively manage and fish. And actually, there are probably more EU boats fishing on our 6-mile line now than there have ever been at any point. So I think it was a rotten deal. But fishing, of course, a much more important issue in France than it is in the UK. We've always lost on fishing, haven't we?
Well, I would probably disagree that it is a bigger issue in France than it is in the UK. I mean, ultimately, in the first year of Brexit, the ONS figures showed that fish and shellfish exports to Europe dropped by 83%. The industry has been hit by red tape, paperwork, leading to significant delays. And this is a delay in an enormous export for quite significant parts of our community that just can't deal with the delay. If you catch something, you have to have it in market within 20 hours. We're now looking at taking 3 or 4 days. Additional processing means that things can go wrong. And if we are serious, and if people leave the old leave and remain debate at the door, no one can seriously look at the body of evidence on the impact of Brexit on the fishing industry and say that it's been a good thing. It's been quite devastating. Now, you say that the issue might mean more for Europe.
Richard, it was the worst deal ever. It really
Well,
was the worst deal ever, you know, and on that we'd agree. Richard, I've got to move on, but it's very valuable to have this conversation with us. We may come from different perspectives, but we have some degree of agreement, I think, on this issue. Thank you very much indeed. Now, one thing, folks, I've noticed over the last few years, and perhaps